Abandoned on her wedding day, the Alpha now claims her as his mate. The morning mist clung to the stone towers of the kingdom like a shroud. Sunlight struggled to pierce the gray veil, spilling weak, pale rays across the cobbled streets below. Lady Seraphine stood at the grand altar, her hands trembling slightly, fingers gripping the delicate lace of her sleeves. The hall was filled with nobility, guests murmuring softly, candles flickering in golden sconces. Everything was ready: the orchestra, the flowers, the ceremonial garlands. And yet, something deep inside her whispered that today would not end as expected. Her betrothed, Lord Darien, had promised her a life of peace and love. At least that had been the story told to her since childhood, one of alliance and security. She had trusted him, believed in the warmth behind his smile, the certainty in his voice. But now, standing at the altar, her heart thundering in her chest, she realized that trust was a fragile thing. The moments stretched, silent and unyielding. The noble guests shifted uneasily, glances darting from her to the grand doors of the cathedral. The orchestra faltered, the first notes of the ceremonial music dying on the air. Whispers rippled through the crowd, a low tide of confusion and gossip. And still Lord Darien did not appear. Seraphine's pulse quickened. She could feel every eye upon her, the weight of judgment, the silent curiosity of strangers. The silk of her gown felt heavy, oppressive, as if it were woven from the expectations of the entire court. Her chest tightened. Something had gone terribly wrong. And then a voice rang through the hall, low and commanding, like the rumble of a storm approaching. "You are all fools." The room froze. Gasps echoed as a figure appeared at the entrance. He moved with an effortless, dangerous grace, his presence commanding attention without a single word of explanation. His dark hair fell over sharp features, eyes the color of twilight, deep and unreadable. He wore a long, black cloak that seemed to drink in the light, moving as if alive. Kalen, the Shadowclan's Alpha, the man whose name alone carried whispers of fear and awe across the kingdoms, the man no bride ever hoped to meet. Seraphine's breath caught in her throat. His gaze fell upon her, piercing, intense, claiming. A shiver ran down her spine, not from fear alone, but from the strange, magnetic pull of his presence. He stepped forward, and the murmurs of the crowd grew louder, filled with speculation and unease. "Lady Seraphine," he said, voice smooth and unyielding, "you belong to me." The words cut through the hall like a blade, sharp and impossible to ignore. Seraphine's lips parted in shock, her mind spinning. I do not understand," she whispered. Her voice trembled, but she fought to keep it steady. Kalen's eyes softened just slightly, but the power in his stance never wavered. "The mark you carry," he said, lifting a hand toward the delicate insignia on her wrist, a symbol she had always thought ornamental, "binds you to me. By law older than the kings themselves, you are my destined mate. You cannot deny it." A wave of confusion and fear washed over her. Her heart protested, her mind screaming that this was impossible. But the mark burned against her skin, faintly, like a living thing beneath the surface. And Kalen's eyes, they did not lie. There was an unspoken truth there, heavy with destiny, ancient as the forests beyond the castle walls. Seraphine's lips pressed into a thin line. I am not yours," she said, her voice steadying despite the tremor in her hands. "I do not even know you." Kalen's expression darkened. There was no anger there, not exactly, only a shadow of disappointment and a cold, commanding expectation. "You will learn," he said simply. "I am not a man who asks twice." The guests shifted, some whispering, some gaping, and others retreating cautiously. Seraphine's father, the Duke of Alensar, stepped forward, trying to reclaim the moment. "This is preposterous," he declared, his voice echoing off the stone walls. "You have no claim here." "This is my daughter's wedding." Kalen's gaze did not waver from Seraphine. "The laws of blood and shadow do not bend for humans," he said, almost as a statement of fact rather than threat. "Your father cannot save you from what is already written." Seraphine's mind raced. Every story she had ever heard of the Shadowclan painted them as cruel, unyielding, and unstoppable. She knew the legends of Kalen, of how he had risen to power through battles, cunning, and ruthless determination. And yet there was something in the way he looked at her, a quiet intensity that unsettled her deeply. Before she could respond, the doors of the hall burst open with a violent crash. A shadowy figure lurched into the room, moving toward her with unnatural speed. The hall erupted into chaos as guards drew their weapons. Kalen was already in motion. He moved with fluid, inhuman grace, intercepting the figure with a single, precise motion. The intruder collapsed to the floor unconscious as Kalen's cloak swirled around him like a storm cloud. The room fell silent again, save for the shallow breaths of the stunned crowd. "You see," Kalen said quietly, bending slightly toward Seraphine, "you are in danger. And I am the only one who can protect you." Her heart pounded fiercely, the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Fear and something else, something strange and unfamiliar, stirred within her. The idea of being protected by him, of being close to him, was terrifying, but impossible to ignore. I don't need protection," she said, lifting her chin, trying to mask the tremor in her voice. "I can manage myself." Kalen's lips curved into a shadow of a smile. "We will see." The guests murmured again, some daring to approach, others retreating. Seraphine's mother's eyes were wide with disbelief, and her father's jaw was set, rigid with anger, but Seraphine barely noticed. Her attention was fixed entirely on Kalen, the mysterious, dangerous alpha who had appeared in her life like a storm she could neither predict nor resist. Hours later, when the guests had dispersed, Seraphine found herself standing on the balcony of her chambers, staring out at the misty forests that stretched beyond the castle walls. Kalen's presence was a shadow behind her, silent, observing. "You cannot run from what is yours," he said softly, almost as if reading her thoughts. Seraphine's hands clenched at the railing. "I am not yours," she repeated, though the words felt hollow even to her own ears. Kalen stepped closer, the night air swirling around him, carrying a faint scent of pine and something darker, older. "Destiny is not a question of choice," he said. "It is a current. You may resist, but eventually it will carry you where you are meant to be." For a moment she felt as though he could see into the very depths of her soul, reading her fears, her doubts, her longing, the part of her heart that still dreamed of love, even as it recoiled from him. The tension between them was palpable. Neither moved, but the air seemed charged with an invisible force, a promise and a warning all at once. And then a soft sound reached them from the forest below, a rustle, a whisper of movement. Seraphine turned, eyes widening. Shadows shifted unnaturally, coiling between the trees like living things. She realized with a shiver that the danger Kalen had spoken of was not yet past. Kalen's eyes narrowed. "They are here," he said, voice low and urgent. "And this time they will not wait for an invitation." Seraphine's pulse raced. Fear clawed at her chest, but so did a strange, thrilling anticipation. She did not know what the night would bring, but she knew, with a certainty that left her breathless, that nothing would ever be the same again. As Kalen extended his hand toward her, a silent offer of protection and command, Seraphine hesitated. Pride and fear warred within her, but the pull she felt toward him was undeniable, an invisible thread tying her fate to his. Finally, with a trembling hand, she touched his. The moment their skin met, the chill of the night seemed to vanish, replaced by an electric warmth that surged through her veins. And in that instant, the first thread of their intertwined destiny was spun, one that would pull them through danger, desire, and darkness alike. The wind carried a warning from the forest, sharp and urgent, and Seraphine knew. The night was far from over, and the storm of her new life had only just begun. The forest beyond the castle seemed alive under the pale moonlight. Shadows stretched like fingers, wrapping around the gnarled trunks of ancient trees, whispering secrets only the wind could understand. Lady Seraphine's hands ached from clutching the hem of her gown, but her heart ached more. Fear, uncertainty, and the strange pull toward Kalen warred within her, leaving her breathless. Kalen led her through the mist, his hand firm yet gentle at her back, guiding her away from the open roads where the intruders had lingered. His cloak billowed around him, dark as night, and every movement seemed measured, precise, effortless. Seraphine could not help but notice how his eyes, the color of storm clouds at dusk, constantly scanned the shadows as though daring them to strike. "Why are they after me?" she asked finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Kalen's jaw tightened and his gaze flicked toward the horizon. "Because you are not just any noblewoman," he said. "You carry a mark of power older than any crown in this kingdom. You are tied to forces that most cannot even name. That makes you valuable and dangerous." Seraphine's stomach twisted. She had known her life was never ordinary, but she had never imagined anything like this. Her mind flashed back to the altar, to the cold eyes of the nobles, the absent face of her betrothed, and now to Kalen, the Shadowclan alpha, whose presence was as commanding as the forest itself. "Why me?" she asked, almost pleading. Kaelin hesitated for the briefest moment, enough that she noticed. Because fate does not choose lightly, he said, his voice soft, almost gentle. And because only you can stand at my side when the darkness comes. You may not understand it now, but one day you will. They walked in silence for a while, the sound of their footsteps muted by the thick blanket of fallen leaves. Seraphine's mind raced with questions. What did it mean to be tied to him? Could she trust him? And yet every instinct told her to remain close. There was a safety in his presence, fierce and undeniable, even as his claim unsettled her very being. Kaelin led her to a hidden glade, a circle of moonlight breaking through the dense canopy. At its center stood a small stone building, ancient and unmarked by time. The walls were etched with strange runes that seemed to glow faintly, pulsing in rhythm with the distant heartbeat of the forest. "This is where you will stay," Kaelin said, gesturing toward the building. "It is protected by the old magic. No one can enter without my consent." Seraphine stepped inside cautiously. The air was cool, carrying a faint scent of herbs and wood smoke. The room was sparse but elegant, a single bed, a small table, and shelves lined with scrolls and old tomes. The sense of history, of power, was almost overwhelming. I cannot stay here," she said, trying to hide the tremor in her voice. "I am not yours to command." Kaelin's expression softened, though the fire in his eyes never faded. "You may not belong to me yet," he said quietly, "but your safety belongs to me. That is non-negotiable." Seraphine opened her mouth to argue, but no words came. She realized that no argument could match his presence, his unyielding strength, the sense of inevitability that clung to him like a second skin. Days passed, each one filled with lessons and small trials. Kaelin tested her courage and patience, sending her through the forest to face the creatures and spirits that prowled its edges. At first, she stumbled and faltered, her fear making her breath shallow, her hands shaking. But Kaelin was always near, his gaze never leaving her, guiding without holding her back completely. "You cannot hide behind fear forever," he told her one evening as she returned, exhausted but alive. "Power is not given, it is earned. And if you are to stand at my side, you must learn to command it, not run from it." Seraphine's chest heaved. His words were sharp but necessary. She had spent her life being protected, being guided, being told what to do. For the first time, she understood that survival meant more than obedience. It meant courage, determination, and somehow trust in herself and perhaps, reluctantly, trust in him. There were moments when their eyes met, when the distance between them seemed to shrink and something unspoken passed between them. Seraphine hated herself for feeling drawn to him. He was dangerous, unpredictable, and unrelenting, yet there was a kindness there that he did not show to anyone else. Every look, every word seemed to carry weight, meaning, and sometimes a shadow of longing. One evening, under a sky streaked with violet and silver, Kaelin approached her as she practiced controlling her newly discovered power, a faint, shimmering light that danced at her fingertips. "You are improving," he said, voice low, almost approving. "But your fear still holds you back." Seraphine clenched her jaw. "I am not afraid," she said, though her own hands betrayed her, trembling as the light flickered unevenly. Kaelin's eyes softened. "Fear is not weakness," he said. "It is a signal. It tells you what you must face. Only when you embrace it can you be truly strong." She looked at him, and for a moment the world around them disappeared. There was no forest, no shadows, no prophecy or danger, only him. The distance between them, the tension, the unspoken desires, all seemed to collapse into a single moment, charged with possibility and hesitation. "Kaelin," she whispered, the sound of his name on her lips strange and thrilling. He stepped closer, careful to give her space, yet his presence enveloped her completely. "Yes," his voice was quiet, steady, like a rock in a storm. I do not understand what is happening to me," she said, voice trembling. "Why am I feeling things I cannot name?" Kaelin studied her with a mixture of patience and intensity. "Because the bond between us is older than either of us," he said softly. "It cannot be denied even if you try. The pull you feel is real. It is destiny calling you." Seraphine's mind whirled. Destiny, prophecy, power, words that had seemed abstract her whole life now pressed upon her with undeniable force. And yet, beneath the weight of obligation, another emotion stirred. Something quiet, tender, and terrifying all at once. She could not name it. Could not understand it, but it drew her toward him in ways she had never experienced. The following days brought new challenges. The shadows in the forest grew bolder, creeping closer to the castle walls. Kaelin had her train in both her powers and in survival, teaching her to move silently, strike accurately, and trust her instincts. Each lesson tested her limits, pushing her body and mind to exhaustion. And each day, Kaelin was there, watching, guiding, pushing her forward without ever breaking his stern composure. Yet there were moments when the armor around him seemed to crack, fleeting glimpses of pain or longing that hinted at a past filled with loss and betrayal. Seraphine found herself watching him, noticing the small things, the slight twitch of his hand when memories surfaced, the way his gaze softened when he thought she wasn't looking. It made her heart ache with something she did not fully understand. One night, as they returned from a particularly grueling training session, a distant howl echoed through the forest. Kaelin froze, every muscle tense, eyes narrowing. Seraphine felt her own fear spike, but she forced herself to stand tall. "They are coming," Kaelin murmured. "And this time they will not hesitate." He took her hand, firm and unyielding, leading her toward the hidden paths back to the safety of the glade. Her pulse raced, and for a fleeting moment she allowed herself to trust him completely. She felt the warmth of his hand, the strength in his presence, and though she was scared, she also felt safe. Kaelin's grip tightened ever so slightly, a silent promise. "No harm will come to you while I am here," he said, voice low and commanding. "I swear it." Seraphine's heart thudded painfully in her chest. She wanted to believe him, to feel that promise as more than words. And in that instant, she realized something profound. She did not want to be anywhere else but by his side, even if the path ahead was uncertain, even if danger loomed. The forest seemed to hold its breath as they reached the glade, the moonlight casting long, silver shadows across the clearing. Kaelin released her hand but remained close, his eyes scanning the darkness beyond. The tension in the air was palpable, electric, and Seraphine felt it deep in her bones. "This is only the beginning," Kaelin said quietly. "There will be trials, challenges, and choices you cannot yet imagine, but know this, you are not alone. I will not let anything take you from me." Seraphine swallowed, her throat tight. She could feel the truth in his words, the weight of his promise, and the undeniable pull of something far greater than fear or desire. She was no longer the same woman who had stood at the altar, abandoned and betrayed. She was something more, and her destiny, entwined with Kaelin's, was just beginning to unfold. The shadows in the forest seemed to stir once more, restless and hungry, but Seraphine felt a spark of courage she had never known. The alpha who had claimed her as his mate was no longer just a terrifying figure of legend. He was her protector, her guide, and perhaps something more. And as the wind whispered through the ancient trees, carrying secrets only they could hear, Seraphine realized that nothing in her life would ever be the same again. The night deepened, cloaking the glade in silver and shadow, and with it came a promise of danger, desire, and the first fragile threads of a bond that would be tested by fire, darkness, and destiny itself. The blood moon rose over the kingdom like a wound in the sky, casting a crimson glow across the ancient forests and the high stone walls of the castle. Shadows lengthened unnaturally, crawling across the ground as though reaching for anything living. Lady Seraphine stood at the edge of the glade, her chest tight with anticipation and fear. Kaelin's presence behind her was a steady, protective weight. "You feel it too, don't you?" he asked, his voice low, almost a whisper carried by the wind. His eyes glinted like the last light of dusk. Seraphine nodded, though her throat was dry. "Something is coming," she said, barely daring to speak. The hairs on her arms rose. "It feels alive." Kaelin's hand brushed against hers, not a touch of comfort exactly, but enough to remind her she was not alone. "It is alive," he said, "and it hungers. Tonight we face more than shadows. We face the consequences of choices made long before either of us existed." They moved through the forest with silent urgency. Seraphine could feel the pulse of the land, subtle but insistent, guiding them through hidden paths that even the most experienced trackers would never find. Kaelin's eyes scanned constantly, alert for any sign of movement, every sense tuned to danger. "You're stronger than you realize," he said as they paused near a crumbling stone ruin. The walls, etched with ancient runes, seemed to hum faintly under the blood moon. "Do not underestimate yourself." Seraphine swallowed hard. She had grown accustomed to training with him, but every day, every lesson brought new challenges. Tonight, the danger was no longer a lesson. It was real. and the forest itself seemed to whisper warnings she could not fully understand. They entered the ruins cautiously, the cold stone pressing in around them. Shadows shifted unnaturally, forming shapes that seemed almost human, yet impossible. Kalen raised a hand, a silent signal for her to stay back. His cloak swirled around him like liquid night as he moved forward, eyes glowing faintly as he scanned the darkness. "Stay close," he murmured. "Do not falter. Whatever comes, you must trust your instincts and me." The air grew thick, heavy with a smell like iron and ash. Seraphine felt her pulse quicken. The energy in the ruins was tangible, prickling against her skin, tugging at the mark on her wrist. She realized with a mixture of fear and awe that it pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat. And then they came. Shadows detached themselves from the walls, swirling like smoke, forming twisted figures that moved with unnatural speed. Seraphine froze, terror gripping her, but Kalen was already in motion. With fluid, predatory grace, he intercepted the first shadow, striking it down with precision. The figure dissolved into smoke, leaving only a faint, blackened residue. Another approached, and Kalen did not hesitate. Seraphine, trembling, realized that this was the moment she had trained for, the moment her fears would meet reality. "Move," Kalen commanded, voice sharp but steady. "Now!" Seraphine forced herself forward, the magic in her hands responding instinctively. She raised her palm, and a faint light shimmered, pushing the shadow back. It hissed, recoiling as though wounded by her very presence. Her breath came in ragged gasps, but with Kalen by her side, she felt a spark of courage she had never known. "You can do this," he said, and in that brief moment the shadows seemed less terrifying, less overwhelming. His faith in her ignited something inside her, something stronger than fear. The battle raged, a blur of motion, magic, and shadows. Seraphine stumbled, nearly falling, but Kalen's hand was there, steadying her. His eyes met hers for a fleeting second, and she saw something she had not expected, pride, and perhaps a hint of relief. "You are learning," he said, his voice low but filled with a warmth he rarely showed. "Do not stop now." As the last shadow dissolved into the night, Seraphine sank to her knees, exhausted but alive. The blood moon's light reflected off her pale skin, and she realized how close she had come to failure. But more importantly, she realized she had survived, and that Kalen had been there every step of the way. He extended a hand to her. "Stand," he said simply. "You are stronger than you know, and this is only the beginning." Seraphine took his hand, rising to her feet. She felt the warmth of his touch, the strength in his grip, and a strange, fluttering sensation in her chest. She did not understand it, and she did not try to. There was something undeniable about being so close to him, about feeling protected yet challenged, drawn yet terrified. The forest was quiet now, the shadows gone, but the air remained tense. Kalen's gaze swept over her, assessing, cautious. "The danger is not over," he said. "Something has sensed your power, and it will not be satisfied until it has claimed you or destroyed you." Seraphine shivered, both from fear and anticipation. What do we do?" she asked. Kalen's expression darkened. "We prepare and we wait. The eclipse approaches, and with it, forces that neither of us can face alone." For days, they trained together in the ruins, practicing spells, honing reflexes, and strengthening the bond that neither could deny. Each session was a test of trust and courage, of patience and restraint. Seraphine found herself watching him more closely than ever, noticing the slight tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes softened when he thought she wasn't looking. And she realized, with a mixture of fear and awe, that the feelings stirring within her were no longer confusion. They were longing. One night, as they rested near the ruins, Kalen spoke softly, almost as if confessing to the night itself. "You are not just learning to survive, Seraphine. You are learning to fight, to command, to claim your place in a world that fears what it does not understand. And you are doing it with courage. Courage I have rarely seen in anyone." Seraphine's cheeks warmed, but she did not look away. "You make it sound so easy," she said, voice tinged with humor despite the tension. Kalen's lips curved in the smallest of smiles. "It is never easy," he said, his eyes holding hers. "But it is necessary." There were moments, fleeting and dangerous, when the tension between them threatened to overwhelm reason. A brush of hands during a lesson, a shared glance in the moonlight, a quiet word that lingered too long, all of it built an unspoken connection, a bond that was as much about trust as it was about something far deeper. But there was no time for distractions. The eclipse approached, and with it, the creatures that had already begun testing their strength. One night, the forest shivered under a cold wind, and Kalen knew the first true test had arrived. Shadows crept along the edges of the glade, twisting unnaturally. Seraphine could hear the low hum of their approach, like a heartbeat, slow and deliberate. Kalen moved beside her, body tense, every sense alert. "Do not falter," he said, his voice low and commanding. "If you do, we both fall." Seraphine nodded, her hands glowing faintly with light as she prepared. She had trained, she had learned, but nothing could fully prepare her for the living darkness that now emerged from the trees. The first shadow lunged, a wraith of twisting black smoke and claws that seemed to stretch and writhe. Seraphine raised her hand instinctively, the magic flaring, casting the creature back. Kalen struck beside her, swift and precise, his movements fluid as a predator. More followed, faster, stronger. The blood moon illuminated their forms, and Seraphine realized that this was no ordinary attack. It was a test of endurance, of will, of the bond between them. She fought beside Kalen, and for the first time she did not feel fear alone. She felt determination, courage, and the strange, unshakable certainty that they were meant to face this together. Hours passed in a blur of motion and magic. Finally, the last shadow dissolved into the night, leaving only the echo of wind through the trees. Seraphine sank to her knees, trembling, exhausted, but alive. Kalen knelt beside her, his hand on her shoulder, grounding her. "You did well," he said, voice low, almost tender. "Far better than you think." Seraphine looked up at him, and for the first time she saw not just the Alpha, not just the protector, but the man beneath the legend. Scarred, strong, and somehow longing for something he had long denied himself. The blood moon began to fade, leaving a pale silver light over the forest. But even as calm returned, Seraphine could feel a lingering pulse of darkness, a warning that the trials were far from over. Kalen's gaze met hers, steady and unwavering. "This was only the beginning," he said. "The true test comes with the final eclipse, and when it arrives we will be forced to face choices that could change everything, including us." Seraphine's breath caught. The danger, the magic, the tension, and the bond they shared, it all coalesced into a single, undeniable truth. She could not deny the pull she felt toward him, nor could she deny the fear that gripped her for what lay ahead. And as the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, the forest holding its secrets close, Seraphine understood that the coming eclipse would challenge everything she knew about courage, power, and the fragile, dangerous thing called love. The sky burned crimson as the final. Eclipse approached, casting the kingdom in an eerie twilight. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and smoke, and every leaf, every stone seemed to vibrate with unseen energy. Lady Seraphine stood beside Kalen at the edge of the forest, the ancient mark on her wrist glowing faintly, pulsing like a heartbeat against her skin. She felt the weight of destiny pressing upon her, the culmination of every trial, every lesson, every moment that had brought her here. Kalen's presence beside her was steady and commanding, a shadow of strength and fire. His eyes, dark and stormy, scanned the horizon, alert to every stir of movement. For a moment, Seraphine thought she saw a flicker of doubt in his gaze, quickly replaced by the same determination that had guided him through countless battles. She could feel the tension coiling around them like the quiet before a storm, and she knew that what came next would test them both in ways neither had yet imagined. "The creatures, they will come," Kalen said, voice low, resonant with authority. "And they will not stop until the mark is claimed. But you are ready, Seraphine. I will not let them take you, not now, not ever." Seraphine nodded, drawing a deep breath. The lessons he had taught her, the training, the trust, the courage, had all built to this moment. She felt the magic within her respond instinctively, glowing and warm, a tether that connected her to Kalen and the world in ways she still barely understood. "I trust you," she said simply, and in the quiet firmness of her voice, she meant it with every fiber of her being. The first shadows appeared as the eclipse reached its zenith, coalescing from smoke and darkness, twisting into forms that were both terrifying and alien. Their eyes glimmered with malice, their movements swift and unpredictable. Kalen stepped forward, cloak billowing like a dark banner, and Seraphine followed, heart pounding, hands glowing with the energy she had learned to control. "Stay behind me if you must," Kalen said, his tone commanding but not cruel. "But do not hesitate to act. You are stronger than you know." The battle began with sudden ferocity. Shadows lunged, forming claws and fangs out of pure darkness. Kalen moved with lethal grace, every strike precise, every movement protective yet commanding. Seraphine's magic flared in tandem with his movements, a bright pulse of light that repelled and weakened the creatures. She fought with a determination she had never known, her fear replaced with focus, her instinct guided by the bond they shared. "You are doing well," Kalen said in a rare moment of encouragement, his voice carrying over the clash of battle. "Do not stop." Hours passed, though time seemed meaningless under the blood-red light of the eclipse. Every attack tested them, every shadow a trial of their strength and trust. Seraphine faltered at times, but Kalen's presence never wavered. He was a constant, a tether, and it gave her courage when she felt it slipping away. Finally, the last of the shadows dissolved into nothingness, leaving the forest eerily still. Seraphine sank to her knees, exhausted but alive, her hands trembling from both effort and the lingering adrenaline. Kalen knelt beside her, his hand brushing gently against hers, steadying her. "You survived," he said, voice low but filled with warmth. "And in doing so, you have proven what I have known all along: you are extraordinary." Seraphine looked up at him, her chest heaving, eyes wide with awe and something else, something she could not name but felt in every beat of her heart. I could not have done it without you," she admitted, voice barely above a whisper. Kalen's eyes softened, a rare vulnerability slipping through the mask of the Alpha. "No," he said quietly, "you could have, but I will not lie, I am glad I was here." The eclipse began to fade, the blood-red light giving way to a pale silver dawn. The shadows that had lingered in the corners of the forest dissipated, leaving only the quiet hum of life returning to the kingdom. Seraphine and Kalen stood together, shoulders brushing, the bond between them stronger than ever. She realized that the trials had changed her, sharpened her, and revealed a courage she had never known existed. As they walked back toward the castle, the first rays of sunlight touched the towers, illuminating the world in gold and warmth. Seraphine felt a sense of peace she had not known in weeks. The kingdom was safe, for now, and the immediate danger had passed. Yet she understood that the events of the past days had changed everything. Kalen's gaze lingered on her, serious and unreadable. "Seraphine," he said, voice low, "the bond between us is not just for protection or power. It is something deeper, older, and stronger. It ties our fates together whether we understand it or not. And you have grown into it in ways I never expected." Seraphine's pulse quickened and a warmth spread through her chest. "Kalen, she began, but words failed her. How could she express the mixture of gratitude, admiration, fear, and longing that filled her heart? She could only meet his gaze and let the silence speak. He stepped closer, close enough that the warmth of his presence brushed against her, but careful, as if not wanting to overwhelm her. "You are mine, Seraphine," he said softly. "Not by force, but by choice, by destiny, by everything that has brought us here. I will stand by you, guide you, protect you, and perhaps in time something more." Seraphine's breath caught. The danger, the magic, the lessons, and the shared moments of trust and courage had woven a bond she could no longer deny. Her lips curved into a small, tentative smile. "And I will stand by you," she said, voice steady, yet filled with a newfound strength. "No matter what comes next." Kalen nodded, a shadow of a smile on his lips, though his eyes remained watchful. "Good," he said, his voice carrying the weight of both command and quiet affection. "Because our journey is far from over. There will be more challenges, more shadows to face, but together we are unstoppable." As they approached the castle gates, the first light of dawn bathed the kingdom in gold. Birds began to stir, and the once ominous forest seemed to hum with quiet life. Seraphine felt the weight of her own growth, the change that had taken place within her. She was no longer the timid, abandoned bride of days past. She was a survivor, a fighter, and something more, bound by destiny and choice to the Alpha who had claimed her. Inside the castle, the halls were quiet. The nobles who had witnessed the events of the past days kept their distance, whispers following them like shadows. But Seraphine no longer cared for their judgment. She had faced real danger, real magic, and emerged stronger, with Kalen at her side. That evening, as the sun set and the first stars appeared in the sky, Kalen brought her to the highest tower of the castle. From there, the kingdom stretched out below them, bathed in the soft glow of twilight. "Look at it," he said, voice quiet, almost reverent. "All of this is worth protecting, and all of this is worth fighting for." Seraphine leaned slightly against him, feeling the solid warmth of his presence. "It is beautiful," she said softly. But more than that, it feels like a new beginning. Kalen's hand found hers, intertwining their fingers. A new beginning, he repeated, echoing her words. One that we face together, and no matter what comes, we will endure. We will rise stronger, united. Seraphine felt a surge of emotion, relief, pride, trust, and something deeper still. She could not name it fully, but she knew it was real and it was theirs. For the first time, she believed in the bond, in destiny, and in the possibility of love that was not easy but powerful and transformative. As the night deepened and the stars sparkled above, they remained on the tower, silent but connected. No grand declarations were necessary. The bond, the trust, and the understanding between them were enough. The kingdom was safe, the darkness pushed back, and the path ahead, though uncertain, was theirs to walk together. And in that quiet, powerful moment, Lady Seraphine and Kalen, the alpha of the Shadow Clan, understood that the trials they had faced were only the beginning of a story far greater than themselves. They had survived, transformed, and found in each other a strength and connection that would endure far beyond the eclipse, far beyond the shadows, and into the rising dawn.